Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of RPGs with Paddy. I'm Paddy. Today we're going to be looking at The Once and Future King. We've just finished reviewing The Golden Dawn by Pagan Publishing, and this is an optional sequel scenario that you can add on after all of those. You probably want to have run most of those scenarios before this one, certainly the relevant ones, which we'll get into after the spoilers. Before we begin, don't forget to like and subscribe. I would really appreciate it. And also share this video with anyone you think who would like it. So this scenario is split into two parts in the Whisperer magazine, issue 1 and 2 respectively. This is unfortunately out of print and is exceptionally hard to get hold of. So I am very grateful to the person who allowed me to see the relevant sections in these zines for the purpose of this review, as it is one of the very few Gaslight publications I don't personally have. If you are looking for it, you might have some luck finding issue 1 on Noble Knight Games, but there is almost no information on the internet at all, anywhere about issue 2, so good luck with that. Anyway, on to the scenario. So there will be spoilers ahead, and if you intend to play the game, please stop watching here. But if you want to run the game, or just to find out what kind of conclusion there is to this story, let's find out. So, as I mentioned before, this story is broken into two pieces. The first issue mostly acts as a setup for the majority of the action which takes place in issue 2. So this story continues and concludes the storyline that started in Hell Hath No Fury and then continued in Sheela-na-gig. The quick recap is that a former Golden Dawn member, Randolph Northcote, found the resting place of the ancient King Arthur, and he revived him, hoping to bring back the strength and nobility to the British Empire. However, Arthur is not how he was portrayed in legends and is a brutal pagan immortal who worships Sheela-na-gig, who is a mask for Shub-Niggurath. Arthur tried to blow up St. Paul's Cathedral on Easter as a symbolic destruction of Christianity. The players may or may not have thwarted his plans when in the scenario Sheela-na-gig. This scenario takes place a year after the events of Sheela-na-gig, and Randolph Northcote, who is now deceased, and Arthur, King Arthur, have been working on a plan, building up Arthur's political standing, so that he may, be able to take control of the country. He has gathered very influential people to be part of his new round table, and he uses magic to kind of keep them all aligned with his goals. So the scenario starts with the investigators being called to the Imperial College by Chief Inspector Cleveland. If he is still alive from the previous adventures, he's in some from the Golden Dawn book, but also some from Sacraments of Evil as well. Basically, there has been a break-in at the museum, specifically in the restricted access only section. But the reason the investigators are here is that the body of the librarian is found inside, seemingly ritualistically killed by fire. Inspector Cleveland had to take on the investigators as assistants or consultants on the case at the request of his superior, who, it can be discovered, is a Mason. And the dead librarian is also a Mason. So we're talking about like secret societies here. The death is not actually ritualistic or connected to the Masons. It was just an unfortunate librarian. Arthur sent a minion in to steal some artifacts from this museum, and the librarian happened to interrupt him. Cleveland doesn't really want to work with the investigators, but I think this can depend on the past interactions that they have had. But he will tell them that they have to take stock of everything in the museum and find what's missing. So this is a little bit of grunt work for the investigators. There is a detailed list here in the scenario of everything that's missing. Some of the items are not important, but really the only 3 that are important are discussed more in issue 2, but I'll just mention them here. The investigators would need to do a significant amount of research to find out the details about them, and of course a lot of the other missing items are unimportant, so there will be, red herrings and dead ends and stuff like that. But anyway, the 3 items that are important is are a grail. This is not the same one as used in the previous scenario, but similar and has the same, basic magic properties. It's more of just I think it's a stone bowl. It's much, much older than the one that you use in the previous scenario, and it's kind of cruder. Another thing is a Roman spearhead, and this is a magic weapon that can store magic energy and can be charged at different ley lines. It does extra damage and could set the target on fire as well. This is actually the head of the Spear of Destiny, and this is the spear that Arthur's mortal enemy, Mordred, used to kill him before. It is also, the Spear of Destiny is said to be the spear that pierced the side of Jesus as he was dying on the cross. Arthur is most worried about this weapon because this is the one that, killed him before. And finally, there is an early Christian sword. This is a particularly powerful sword which ignores all armor and does 2d8 plus 2 damage with each hit. And it is, of course, Excalibur. So the only other thing of importance in the museum is a business card among the librarian's effects as a business card for Bonham's Auctioneers. And there's a date written on it, 3 days from now. And although I don't think it can be found out in the scenario, I don't think it would ever come up. The murderer here is Jonathan Freeman. And if you remember, he was the antiques dealer from Hell Hath No Fury. He was being mind controlled and has no memory of it, but for the rest of his life he will suffer nightmares from it. We'll meet him in a second anyway. If the investigators choose to go to the funeral of the librarian, I'm not sure if they would, but if they choose to, it's 2 days later, and you can see some members of the Golden Dawn, people from various academic circles, and if the investigators know, for example, if they're Masons themselves, they will see some other Masons there as well. But oddly enough, Fotheringham, the superintendent, is not present. He's the one who put the inspectors on this case, the investigators on this case. So the main lead really from here is that maybe they go to the auction house and they find out, if they go on that date, that there is a large art sale that day. And at some point during the proceedings, the investigators will hear the announcement of a piece by Melinda Price. And this is the artist who has depicted the real Arthur, not the Arthur of Legends. She has painted various real Arthur paintings in the previous scenarios, but she's been dead several hundreds of years. But there is a man in his 50s who matches every bid that the investigators or anyone else makes for the Melinda Price paintings. And the investigators, if they are surviving from previous scenarios, they will probably recognize him as Jonathan Freeman. Again, the antiques dealer from Hell Hath No Fury. The investigators can outbid him, but he will keep going up until £300. And this might take some time because the auction house was only hoping to get around 80 for it. If the investigators outbid him, he will come to them to ask them to consider selling it to him, and he invites them to find him at his club, with the club that he's staying at, with Captain Simerson. If he, however, outbids them, he will come over and talk to them anyway, maybe remembering them from the previous scenario, or, having enjoyed this bidding war. At this time anyway, he will introduce Captain Nigel Simerson, because they all know Randolph Northcote, because Captain Nigel Simerson, I think, fought with him in India. Oh no, I know, that's important later. The only strange thing here is that in the scenario Hell Hath No Fury, it makes a note of saying that Freeman hated Northcote for no particular reason. So I guess you could either just omit that, non-important part in Hell Hath No Fury, just don't bring it up. Or you could kind of say that maybe Freeman has forgiven all since Northcote died a year ago in Sheela-na-gig. But Freeman, anyway, is happy to meet up again and says that he's going to be staying in London with the captain at the Raj Club, which is a gentleman's club, and he will give the players the card for the Raj Club. So next up, there's a little bit more information here about Melinda Price's paintings, but it's pretty much the same that was covered in the Golden Dawn scenario. So you should, and the players should already know this. I don't think there's anything new there. So the next thing is that William Wynne Westcott, one of the Golden Dawn founders, comes to seek out the investigators. So at this stage in real life, he has already cut almost all of his ties with the Golden Dawn. So Mathers covertly outed Westcott's membership in the Golden Dawn to the medical board. So then Westcott had to disavow the Golden Dawn to save his doctor's license. Westcott doesn't know who outed him, and nor do the investigators, probably. But anyway, Westcott thinks that the same person that outed him to the medical board is out to get him again, as there has been an increase in the number of grave robbings. And this includes bodies snatched from mortuaries under his control. The reason he seeks out the investigators is that the most recent grave to be robbed is that of Martin Giles, who is the deceased librarian. So, yeah, you know that the players might do a little bit of graveyard watching or something like that, but there's nothing in the scenario to suggest that they would get anything from it, really. The only place now to look, the only kind of connection that they have now, even though it's like a little bit tenuous, is to go to the Raj Club. I guess the reason for going there is because A, you don't have any other options, really. You don't have any other leads. And B, the Melinda Price to Arthur connection might get the players to think about resurrected dead bodies, because that came up in Sheela-na-gig. So anyway, if they get to the club, it's kind of very richly adorned with tiger skins, lots of potted plants, big fireplaces. And this is a club used by members of the military who served in India. And most of the staff working here are Indian. The investigators will be greeted upon their arrival by Sergeant Major Mills, or ex-Sergeant Major Mills. If they mention that they're here to see Simmerson, he will give them a guided tour of the club. And there are a number of people that they will see as they walk around that can be investigated later. Or possibly, depending on the class level of the investigators, they might actually recognize a few VIPs there as well. So anyway, there's not so much on the ground floor. You move up from the, just in case there's any Americans watching, you move up from the ground floor to the first floor. And on the first floor there's lots of apartments, but nothing really special there. You can break into the locked rooms, but there's nothing there. So moving up, ground floor, first floor, second floor. To get to the second floor, it's accessible by a secret staircase, and if you go up, you're greeted by hideous creatures on the wall. So these are the trophies of hunted ghouls. And you can kind of look around, but this is like a very shocking discovery, really. But in the room, there's also some occult manuscripts and mythos tomes, if you look around. But as the investigators are looking around, a wall partition opens up, and Simmerson comes in with an old Indian snake charmer. And Simmerson will greet the investigators, kind of friendly as well. So they can question him about anything they want. He thinks that maybe they might be useful to his organization, and we'll find out a little bit more about them later. And he wants to kind of take their focus away from the murder of Giles. Simmerson doesn't want to attack the investigators or hurt them in any way unless he is forced to. So if the players attack him or try to cause harm to anyone or anything here, Sergeant Major Mills, Simmerson himself, the snake charmer who came in with him, and 4 manservants will attack the investigators. But if they ask about Simmerson, or the ghouls that they can see, or the Raj in general, he will say that while they were on a tour in India, his regiment, or a subsection of his regiment, went out and found these monstrous things. Of the initial squad that went out, only 4 of them survived. Simmerson, Randolph Northcote, Sergeant Major Mills, who's here, and the snake charmer. The snake charmer was acting as their guide. The rest of them were killed by ghouls. They vowed to dedicate themselves to hunting down ghouls and other monstrous creatures. So that's this Raj Club that they set up here. So he will try to enlist the investigators into his service to fight the evil and the darkness. Simmerson's goal is all-out war against any of the kind of like occultists who want to bring the old ones back and thus destroy humanity. And the only other thing is that he will deny any knowledge of Giles's murder. And that's really all you're going to get out of the visit to the Raj. Obviously, how that plays out is left fairly open depending on the actions of your investigators. But the day after the visit to the Raj Club, the investigators are told that their investigation into Giles's murder has been terminated. Inspector Cleveland will tell them about this, and he will say that it was shut down by Superintendent Fotheringham, who was the one who set it up. Cleveland is visibly frustrated by this, and he knows something strange is going on, but he doesn't know what. But that's it. The investigators are on their own. The police won't help unless the investigators can come forward with irrefutable proof. And that is where issue 1 ends. But, of course, we'll just continue with issue 2 right now. And issue 2 is just a little bit longer. So the investigators should be thinking that them being pulled off the case has something to do with their visit to the Raj Club. They can try investigating some of the people, the famous people, the VIPs, that they saw at the club by going through newspapers and society magazines, or, as I mentioned before, some upper-class investigators may already know them. So after this, we get a breakdown of the major members of the round table and what they want out of their membership. It's actually not that important for this scenario, but it is really, really great information if you're expanding this out into a campaign, which I'll talk about at the end of the video. But for now, I'll just mention just the key parts. So there is Superintendent Fotheringham, and he's only really interested in his own self-advancement. That's all he wants. There is Captain Jasper Nichols, who was with Simmerson in India, and he wants to bring the British Empire back to full strength. There is the Right Worshipful William Thornley J.P., which stands for Justice of Peace, and he is an influential and a harsh judge, and basically he only cares about money. There is also the Right Honourable Edward Forsyth, MP, Member of Parliament, and the rumour is that he is being groomed to be the next Prime Minister. There is Sir Sidney Bellingham, who has been an ambassador to most of the countries in the British Empire, so he has a lot of international influence. There's also Sir Nicholas Pemberton, who rules with an iron fist. He's a military man. During the Boer War, he put the Boer rebels into what would later be called concentration camps. He now works at the Home Office and is tasked with dealing with the Irish problem. And finally, there is the Reverend Albert Marchbank, who is the newest member of the Round Table. He doesn't know why he's there. He seems to be diametrically opposed to everything the other knights stand for. He says that he thinks it's little more than a debating society, but he really thinks, so if the investigators talk to him, he'll say he just thinks it's a debating society, but really he thinks much more is going on. But he can't imagine what role he plays in it. So if the investigators start digging around too much or are asking too many questions or in any way indicating to Arthur or to Simmerson that they are potential enemies, action will be taken against them. If any of the investigators who fail a luck roll will suffer some serious social or financial difficulty, and there's a few examples given here. Arthur and Simmerson really want them to rethink their involvement and potential opposition to them as well. The main source of information that the investigators have should be the Reverend, although I'm not sure how the players are supposed to guess that. He can tell them some information, most notably the next meeting of King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table, which he views as just like a silly name that they take on. He doesn't think that it's really King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. But he can tell them that the next meeting is in a few days on April 30th. And they always meet at St. Giles' Rookery, which we'll get to a little bit later. If the investigators have not found any connections, like coming quite close to this, the Reverend will reach out to them saying he noticed them at the Raj Club and he's just curious to get some information from them or possibly get them to do some background research. Maybe he's concerned about what his involvement is and just wants to see if the investigators know anything. Apart from that, an occult roll can identify April 30th as Walpurgisnacht, which is the witch's Sabbath. So now, finally, we get to Arthur's plan. The reason he recruited Marchbank is because the Reverend has access to the vaults of St. Paul's Cathedral. So Arthur's previous actions there in Sheela-na-gig, trying to blow it up, prevent him from returning there in person. But in the vaults of St. Paul's Cathedral is what Arthur needs, which is a bride stone from Norman times. This is a monolith, sometimes used in wedding ceremonies, where there's kind of like a stone with a hole in it, and the couple would join hands through the hole for good luck or something. But it marks the crossing of two ley lines. You can place the grail in there, in the hole, and the grail absorbs energy. And similarly, the Spear of Destiny and possibly Excalibur. I'm not sure if Excalibur needs it. But Arthur has been mind controlling Marchbank to go in there to charge the grail. There's a certain limit of how much energy it can absorb per day, so he wants to bring it back to full strength, but also he's then using it as well, but he kind of stores it in here for the charging and then brings it out. I think he stores it in here. It's not quite spelled out. So all of this can kind of be found out if the investigators follow Marchbank or if they stake out St. Paul's at night. It seems a little bit weird that they would do either of those things. The connection is St. Paul's was where Arthur attacked last time, so maybe they think he wants to go back there. But maybe Marchbank wants to hire them on as bodyguards or something like that, or just to, trail him or something. It's kind of tenuous link there anyway. But anyway, this might lead the investigators to find the Bridestone and what Arthur is after. The room with the Bridestone also contains the relics of Arthur's past, which I discussed earlier, which was the Old Grail, the Spear of Destiny, and Excalibur. They are kept here for charging with the magic points from the Bridestone. Otherwise, Arthur wouldn't keep them here, as he can't easily access them here. So it also has the possibility, if the investigators come here now, that they might take the Grail, which would be frustrating for Arthur, but wouldn't ruin his plans. They could also take the Spear of Destiny, which might help them later. But and I'll put in a note here if I'm wrong, but I think Excalibur doesn't need to be charged. So there's no reason for Excalibur to be in here. And we want, well, probably for dramatic purposes, we probably want Arthur to have Excalibur with him. Anyway, on the wall in a bronze plaque is a Brotherhood Oath written there, and it's really a mind link spell. So when the Knights of the Round Table and Arthur say it together, it creates a mind link between them. So around the room are also various sacks. Some of them contain the other unimportant stolen artifacts, but some of the other sacks start moving and they are revealed to be misshapen, resurrected humans. These are all corpses that were dug up and resurrected. And they are in such severe pain that all they want to do is inflict as much pain as they can. So I don't think it's spelled out in the scenario, but I guess this is one of two reasons why they're not the same as the Grail Thralls from before. One reason is that they are dug up, so they were dead for longer and then brought back, which maybe makes it more difficult for the resurrection. And the other one is that Arthur is using a cruder grail. So maybe this is before the magic of the grail was perfected. And so it can bring them back to life, but not with such effectiveness, I guess. And yeah. So they're going to attack anyone who comes in. And assuming the investigators get out, we will move on to the night of the 30th. So to find out about this, you can either follow any of the knights, or you can just go to St. Giles's Rookery if you know that from Marchbank. It's quite a sprawling slum with lots of children running around. And there's also lots of dangerous looking gangs kind of standing around who will be staring at the investigators and making them feel uncomfortable or threatened. But they will only attack or rob the investigators if they're provoked. So if the investigators just keep to themselves, they'll be all right here. But they should feel quite threatened and uncomfortable. Anyway, they will find their way through to the White Horse Tavern. And there is a dogfight and a fist fight in progress. For a lot of players, I think the dogfight could be quite upsetting as well. So you could just focus on the brutal fist fight that's going on as well. But anyway, while you're kind of watching this, a spot hidden will catch a glimpse of Arthur watching from an upstairs window. If they try to go up, the landlord is unlikely to allow them upstairs unless he can be persuaded or bribed. But yeah, the investigators do need to get up there somehow. Once they get upstairs, Arthur is gone, but there are signs of a struggle, including Marchbank's broken monocle. And we'll come back to this in a little bit, because this is one of the inconsistencies in the scenario, I think. A spot hidden reveals a fake chimney stack, which can be moved aside to access the rooftops. And there's a series of rooftops and walkways that kind of combine here in a spider web-like connection on top of the rookery. There's some great atmospheric description here too, but the key thing is in the distance you can hear a chant, which can be identified as the Brotherhood Oath from the Bridestone Room. You can follow this, which will lead you to the temporary court of King Arthur. And you can listen to their discussion, or as you're getting closer, you can start to hear what's going on. And the discussion is basically talking about the need for courage and strong men to combat the coming of Cthulhu and the Great Old Ones. Then all 6 voices chant something new as one, so they're all chanting together. And if you make a successful Cthulhu Mythos roll, you can identify this as a spell to summon a hunting horror. And it says here, Marchbank realizes too late that he is the sacrificial victim for the spell. But 2 things here. One is the scenario doesn't allow or doesn't give any indication if Marchbank isn't here. For example, if the investigators convinced him not to go, maybe. And the second thing is, if there was a struggle back there and his monocle was broken, why is he only realizing now that he's the sacrificial victim? Anyway, not so important, just minor details you can sort out yourself. But at this point, if the investigators look in, they can see the VIPs from the Raj Club are there, along with Simerson and Arthur. The investigators do have to act very quickly to disrupt the spell before the hunting horror appears. Arthur will keep going with the chant until his HP is reduced to half, but then it says his knights will continue in his place. So I don't know if there's really a way for you to stop the spell from happening. The target for the hunting horror is the current Prime Minister. If the investigators interrupt the ritual, the hunting horror will still appear, I think, and then lash out at all present. Otherwise, if the binding ritual is completed, so I think they're saying the summoning spell will happen. There's no stopping that, I think. But you could possibly interrupt the binding spell. And if you interrupt the binding ritual, the hunting horror will lash out at everyone present. So it will possibly kill all of them, and you as well. Otherwise, it will take Marchbank as a sacrifice and then fly off to attack the Prime Minister. If you're intervening before that, Simerson will try to plead, or even after that, Simerson will try to plead with the party that Arthur is the only one capable of holding back the darkness of the Old Ones and the Mythos creatures. He will fight to the death to protect Arthur unless he finds out the true nature of Arthur's deity, not Sheela-na-gig, but really Shub-Niggurath. At that point, if Simerson finds out about that, he will attack Arthur, but Arthur will kill him easily with Excalibur. So now that the summoning is complete, Arthur breaks his mind link from the Brotherhood Oath with the other Knights of the Round Table, and then he has his mind free so he can call forth his Grail spawn to attack the investigators, and several of them come out anyway. Arthur will stay and probably fight as well, and he will only run away if he believes that defeat is imminent. If that happens, he will flee into the streets, and if the investigators catch up to him, he will make his final stand at Victoria Embankment. He challenges the investigators to a one-on-one duel with no guns. If anyone, because it's kind of like an honor thing then, if anyone is wielding the Spear of Destiny, so Mordred's spear, they will feel compelled to battle him. Optionally, they may be possessed and empowered by the spirit of Mordred coming back to finish the job. In the end, the investigators will probably be able to kill Arthur, is what it says in the scenario. I don't know about that. And then Arthur will fall over the bridge, throwing Excalibur into the river. He's dead, but his body will never be recovered. Not really explained there. So now we get to wrapping things up. If the investigators were successful, a few days later the auctioneer arrives at their house, offering them first dibs on 2 more Melinda Price paintings that came into his possession. One is a grim image of Arthur and the hunting horror and what might have been if the investigators had failed. The other shows a painting of Arthur at a banquet with his knights, almost like a parody of The Last Supper. And all of the knights the investigators met are there, with their faces clearly visible, but there are 4 others with their backs to the painter, whose faces can't be seen. And I love this. I love this so much. I think that's a really great way to set up future adventures. If Arthur broke his link with the Grail Spawn so that he could run away, some of them will fight amongst each other, some of them will just let themselves die in the streets, some will be committed to an insane asylum, and some will go to live under the city as well, possibly making enemies or allies in the future. On the other hand, if the investigators were unsuccessful, the Prime Minister will die, and there's a lot of uncertainty, unrest and rioting until the Round Table gather and, put things back in order. They save the day. After this, Forsyth will become the new Prime Minister, and Arthur's claim to the throne is verified after the royal family were killed in the uprising. So Arthur is now the king. Now we'll get back to that in a second because there's a little inconsistency here as well. The investigators are in a lot of trouble now, if they survived even, because now they are kind of enemies of the state as well, and the King Arthur and the knights will make a lot of trouble for them, making sure that they are discredited and hounded all the time. As Arthur continues to clash with the mythos, many terrible phenomena will occur all over, eventually leading to all-out war between humanity and the Old Ones. By 1901, the Golden Dawn is pretty much completely dissolved, and as the scenario says, perhaps more disturbing is the death of Queen Victoria that same year, and the ascension to the throne of her son Edward VII, honorary member of the Raj Club. So this is an interesting idea, but it's just a little bit strange because they said just a little bit before that the royal family was slain and Arthur took the throne. So obviously in 1901, Queen Victoria did die and Edward VII did come to the throne in real life. So I guess that's the connection they're trying to make, but they just said that they were all killed as well. So a little bit unclear there. So kind of just make of it what you want. And after that, there is a little bit about rewards and penalties that I won't really go into here. So let's go on to my thoughts and reflections on this. I love this idea. I think this is an excellent expansion on the concept started in Hell Hath No Fury and continued in Sheela-na-gig. The idea of a shadow organization fighting ghouls and the mythos is excellent. The Golden Dawn itself is not so much into that. Like, the Golden Dawn is, obviously it was a real society, but it wasn't really into fighting the mythos. That makes sense. But that means that the Golden Dawn isn't as natural an organization to join for a Call of Cthulhu game. And the magic that you can gain in the Golden Dawn is really pretty minimal and not really that connected to the Cthulhu mythos. So I think that the Raj Club presents a much more interesting organization, and the investigators could surely be encouraged to join in the work of the Raj Club. I also think that the different knights introduced here are a great idea. Very influential people spread across society. You've got judges, you've got military men, you've got members of parliament, you've got members of the clergy, of course, very influential at that time. And they're working behind the scenes to fight the mythos. However, there just wasn't enough time to build up the characters. And so that is one of my biggest gripes with this is, and at the start of this scenario and at the start of Sheela-na-gig, the author, Garrie Hall, mentions that the text is necessarily long for a relatively short scenario. And that's a pity. I know it was only published in a zine, so the space was limited, but I think this concept could have really grown into a full campaign. And I think that's what it really needed, because this scenario has great ideas, really, really great, I think, really interesting ideas. But there's not enough time to kind of develop the story. And looking back on it, there's several kind of plot holes and bottlenecks where, you know, certain things don't make sense, or there's no logical reason for the players to go to the next step. And say, for example, as well with Fotheringham, the superintendent, he gets the investigators on this case, but surely he knows that it was by King Arthur, so why does he want them to investigate it? Maybe to join the Raj Club, but then after they visit the Raj Club, he pulls them off the case. It's not really explained that much, or maybe I missed it. And the second point as well, which I've already mentioned, is that the various VIPs, the various knights of the Round Table, are great characters, and there's actually a lot of background that the investigators will never find out about if they play it like this. You'd have to expand it quite a lot. So, what I would do if I were expanding this into a campaign, I would have something like this. So the investigators get drawn into some investigation that they find ghouls living under the city, and they sort out that problem. You know, maybe a small warren of ghouls. Then they get noticed by a member of the Raj Club and are given another mission. And they get various missions, missions from the different members of the Raj Club. And they are gradually getting more and more permissions and within the club, and knowledge about the club and the secrets that they have as well. So this, I'll get into why that's good in a minute. Northcote will then become unhappy with the lack of progress being made and the constant new threats. And he leaves the Raj Club and goes to find Arthur. The investigators then will go and do the Black Annie mission a few missions later, and they'll bump into Northcote. And he's happy to see them again and says that he is making good progress, but will fill them in later when he's ready to present things to the Raj Club. Northcote realizes his mistake and tries to contact the investigators, which then leads to the Sheela-na-gig scenario. And then a new influence can be felt in the Raj Club, and the missions being given are a little bit different, and the demeanor of the members has changed. And so the investigators feel there's a definite shift here. And then the events of this scenario will play out, more or less. So obviously that's a very rough outline there, but I think this gives time to build up the various characters in this scenario, and it also gives the investigators a better mythos organization, I think. The Golden Dawn is somewhat interesting and obviously based in reality, so it can be very immersive, but they don't really do much. They're not really connected to the mythos or anything, and they're not really involved in the different scenarios, apart from just like the very thin connection to start the scenario. It's really up to the keeper to bring them more and more into play, but it can be a little bit forced. And as I mentioned before, the knowledge that the investigators gain from the Golden Dawn is not so much, really. They can learn to make talismans and stuff like that. It's not really that connected to the Cthulhu mythos. The Raj Club, on the other hand, has a direct connection, being that it's trying to actually stop mythos creatures and stop the summoning of the great old ones. And then the players will be in the difficult position of possibly having to choose between joining the movement to usurp the throne and to murder the Prime Minister, or to go against their beloved club and the people that they have trusted. Alternatively, if you wanted to keep that Raj Club as the main organization there, you could have a splinter faction of the club with some of the more influential people, some of the people that they know and they respect, moving off to have this movement with King Arthur. And that would make it a little bit more difficult to go against them. You're fighting against people that you know and you like. So this, if turning this into a campaign, definitely it's quite a bit pulpy, but it sounds really interesting to me. You could probably fill in most of the scenarios that they get, the missions that they get, with the other Gaslight supplements, so like Sacraments of Evil and Dark Designs and other ones as well. So that's just an idea for expanding it. I think I want to develop something like that if I'm going to play this. If you're interested in doing this, maybe checking out the Pulp Cthulhu 7th edition would be good for you, because that gives guidance for setting up organizations and gives some sample organizations as well. It's not meant for Gaslight, but it gives a pretty good basis. So that is all for today. I would love to recommend that you go and get this and give it a read. Originally, it cost only £3.50 for each issue. Unfortunately, they are now almost impossible to get. So if you love the idea of the return of King Arthur, but him not being as noble and romantic as described in the legends, then I would say first check out the Golden Dawn book, which is still difficult to get. You can get it, but it's expensive. Then you can, if you like what's going on there, you can try and get hold of the Whisperer magazines. Again, Noble Knights Games is probably your best bet, because they do sometimes have some of the Whisperer magazines. I've definitely seen issue 3, 4, and 5 there. But it can be really slim pickings. It just depends on when people decide to sell their secondhand issues. And honestly, issue 2 really seems to have disappeared from existence. I scoured the internet trying to find any information from it, and it's almost non-existent. Maybe King Arthur wants to hide the existence of the Raj Club after all. Okay, so that is going to do it. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will be back soon with reviews of the scenarios from Sacraments of Evil, which is the Gaslight supplement with 6 scenarios. So, thank you for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye!